Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this, the fourth and final program in the 2015 One Book, One Community series. Thanks to all of you for being here. My name is Bart O'Brien, and I'm a former superintendent of the Placer Union High School District. And I'm the co-chair of One Book, One Community, along with Steve Brunmeyer, who, unlike me, he got a haircut for tonight. He looks really good. You'll get to see him later. Steve and I are both Rotarians who love books, and we love to talk about books. And One Book, One Community is a result of our passion. However, we couldn't do any of this without our sponsors. And the four sponsors for One Book, One Community in Auburn are: first, the Auburn Rotary Club; second, the Placer County Office of Education; third, the Auburn Placer County Library; and fourth, the Placer Union High School District. So please join me. Thank you. And as a couple of former classroom guys, Steve and I couldn't have gotten this program off the ground without some huge help from some genuinely talented people. First and foremost on that list is Kendra Amelong from the Placer County Office of Education. So, Superintendent Gail Garbolino's gift to our effort was introducing Steve and I to Kendra 3 years ago. She has been wonderful through all 3 years of this of our program, and again has been just a key part of everything we've accomplished. So other key contributors to the effort are Terry Pilot of the Auburn Library, and Terry's out here somewhere. There's Terry. Jeff Tucker, who's hiding in the corner here. He's got a red shirt on. And not to compete with Colfax High, that's doing the Wizard of Oz right now, but the man behind the curtain, who you can't see, is Greg Ramseth, and he's in charge of all that. Another one of our key people is Mary Cleary, who doesn't like to be introduced, doesn't want to stand up, but my wife Loretta is going to push her up right now so we can see Mary. Mary had the misfortune in life to draw this short card and be friends with both Steve and Bart. So we got her. Susan Rushton is down here in the front with Terry Pilot. And she, believe it or not, I'm sure you've all seen these programs, she's had us on her cable TV program for 3 years running. And she has kept our efforts in print, in the print world, by writing extensively about our work in the Auburn Journal. So thank you, Susan. And I'd also like to thank Paula Amarine, who did our beautiful artwork for this year's poster. Paula, please stand up. I hope you saw that beautiful Old Town Auburn billboard and our bookmarks. So thanks to everyone on the committee. This wouldn't happen without all of your talent. So thank you very much. This year, our selection is the delightful Beekeeper's Lament. Spending dozens of hours helping us to learn something about bees were our fellow Rotarians, Bart Rude and Ron Martinez. Thank you both for your insights, patience, and senses of humor. You have added a lot to this journey. So we're Bart and Ron. Ron's selling books out in front, but those guys know about bees, so they help us a lot. Thank you. And finally, my longtime friend, Mr. Rick Brown, has facilitated our author interviews for the past 2 years. He did a wonderful job, but this year, he got bumped. I had to tell him, quote, "Sorry, Rick, we got Beth Ruyak." So, I know Rick was disappointed, but he agreed to take on the far more daunting task of hosting last week's panel discussion, and he did a marvelous job. So thank you, Rick, you're a community treasure. I've known Rick for about, close to 40 years, and we've been dear friends. I've never seen him nervous, but he was nervous before the panel, but he did a great job, and I really appreciate him doing that. Earlier this spring, we held 3 different events about the book and bees. We showed the film, as you saw a minute ago, More Than Honey. We held a farm to fork style dinner that featured honey and several excellent foods. And last week, we had a panel of 3 wonderful bee-loving people who had a lot to say about bee habitats, various maladies facing the insects, GMOs, and lots more. Somewhere in excess of 550 people have participated in these events, more than in past years, even without counting tonight. It's been tremendously gratifying, but I can't help but wonder, is it bees or books? So, I have been anxious to learn, are you more of a bee person or a book person? So please raise your hand if you're a book person. Okay, wow, lots of book people. Check it out, Steve. Okay, now if you're a bee person, okay, still lots of hands. Good. Okay, well, the bee people are always welcome. You know, if we don't have a bee book, just know that. So, because this is going to help us with our next big task, which is selecting the book for next year. We know we want it to be well written, interesting, focused on some aspect of our region's agriculture, history, economy, or other topic of general interest to people living in the area. If you have ideas, please let us know. Our website is pretty easy to remember. It's auburnobOC.org. Or call one of us, or better yet, stop us on the street or in the grocery store. Just let us know what you think would be a great story to bring us all back together next April. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this evening for months. Ever since we made contact with our author, Hannah Nordhaus, and then with Beth Ruyak, I thought, this is going to be a great program. So let me introduce the speakers, but quickly I have to introduce you to one other key player in this year's book series of events. He has come to some of our meetings, he's made suggestions about details at different events, he's attended every event, and he's carried on his own work despite our frequent distractions and his own terrible accident. For those of you who have read The Beekeeper's Lament, I know you feel like you already know him. But with us tonight is the main character in the story, John Miller. John has been keeping bees in Placer County for almost 40 years, and he is a 4th-generation beekeeper. He has 4 children, and one of them, Jason, is the 5th generation at Miller Honey Farms. So John, even more so than I do, has ADD, and he's in a wheelchair because he had an accident, so God knows where he is. He was up here a few minutes ago. Come on, oh, there he is. I see him blooming in the darkness. But if you haven't read A Beekeeper's Lament yet, if you haven't read the book yet, you have a treat in store for you, and you'll learn a lot more about John. And he lives just right down the road in Newcastle. But so thank you, John, for all you've done for us. We hope you continue to have a rapid recovery. And please pay attention to the doctor. I know you're doing way more stuff than you're supposed to. And just as another note, Hannah has agreed to stick around and sign copies of her books after this evening's program. She will do this in the lobby about 5 minutes after we wrap things up. So thanks to Hannah for that. So our moderator this evening has been around Sacramento for many years. Beth Ruyak shared our living rooms for years as a reporter and anchor for television news. And currently, she keeps us company in our cars as we listen to Insight on Capital Public Radio. I'm just so excited that Beth is here. Early in her career, she found her way from newsrooms in Minnesota to California. She covered news, sports, science, health, arts, and entertainment. Beth worked as a reporter, anchor, producer, and writer. She hosted daytime television, magazine shows, and special events. Among the highlights of her career are sideline reporting for 5 Olympic Games and Super Bowl 25, traversing Europe for 3 Tour de France bicycle races, co-hosting the home show and guest hosting Good Morning America. Her news, sports, and health reports have earned Emmy Awards and opportunities to interview, learn from, and tell stories about people all over the world. As host of Insight, Beth delights in the opportunity to communicate and converse in the region she calls home. Just yesterday, her show featured 3 students and teacher John Dederick from Colfax High School, who tonight are beginning an amazing production of The Wizard of Oz. This morning, Beth began a dialogue with our author, and in just a few minutes, their conversation will continue. Please welcome Beth Ruyak. Despite all the accolades, it's really nice to see she still has a little trouble with the technology, with wires and all that stuff.
Wear a microphone. Okay, take this out.
Sometime late last summer, I sent an email to an author in Boulder, Colorado. I had just read her book and wondered if she would be willing to come to Auburn. I told her I was a retired guy with a small budget. Well, Hannah Nordhaus responded with gusto. She said, "I'd love to come to Auburn." And so I liked her right away. And Hannah Nordhaus is the author of the best-selling The Beekeeper's Lament, How 1 Man and 500 million honeybees help feed America. And her new book, American Ghost, the true story of a family's haunted past. I know our program is about her book, but I've got to tell you, her second book is wonderful. For those of you who descend from Europeans, and that's a bunch of us, this is a version of what the American experience has been for millions of immigrants, with a few ghost stories thrown in for good measure. I highly recommend it. We have a few copies of it in the back if you'd like to pick one up. The Beekeeper's, I don't get a cut from that, by the way. The Beekeeper's Lament received critical acclaim from the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, Mother Jones, Audubon, and dozens of other newspapers, magazines, and websites. The Associated Press deemed the book, quote, a fascinating read from cover to cover. The Boston Globe suggested, quote, the Beekeeper's Lament is at once a science lesson, sociological study, and breezy read. A book about bees could easily descend into academia, but the author settles for nothing less than literature. So that's why my esteemed colleague, Steve Grunmeyer, he went for that, because he's a literature guy. The book, Hannah's First, was a PIN Center USA Book Awards finalist, a Colorado Book Awards finalist, a National Federation of Press Women Book Award winner, and also appeared on a number of year-end best-of lists. For Auburn, it's our third selection of One Book, One Community. Hannah's writing has also appeared in the Financial Times, the LA Times, Outside Magazine, Times Literary Supplement, Ski Magazine, High Country News, The Village Voice, and many other publications. And now listen to this, because the list of articles is kind of amazing, so I couldn't cut these out. Her articles have covered litigious prostitutes in Montana, snorkeling salmon counters in Idaho, the underground history of dismantled nuclear weapons facility near Denver, wildlife crime investigations in Oregon, a personal history of New Mexico's San Juan Basin natural gas fields, her great-great-grandmother's ghost, and profiles, I'm not really sure what these are, but they're profiles of dildo art thieves and dog-do GPS mappers in Boulder, Colorado. So, maybe at least time to talk about that. From 2007 to 2009, she was also outdoors columnist for the Denver Rocky Mountain News. She has received Associated Press and California Newspaper Publishing Association awards for features writing and business reporting, as well as a special citation from Knight Foundation's James D. Risser Prize for Western Environmental Journalism. She's a star, and she's here in Auburn. Please welcome Hannah Nordhaus.
We just sent off some electricity. I really need to microphone. How is it to be back in? Get used to our pattern, right? How is it to be back in bee country?
Oh, it's lovely to be here, and it's not as green as last time I was here, which is a little sad to see, but it's just the same otherwise. It's so beautiful. It's lovely country to live in.
Between the time of the book being published in 2011 and today, when you met John Miller for lunch, had you been back here? Had the two of you been together?
I had seen John. He came to Denver once, and we did a talk in Marin County for Bee Club. I have not been to Placer County since the book came out.
I hear you moving around.
He's around a lot.
He's never far away. So there's been the experience of all of you living here and Hannah's book and knowing John. But Hannah was having a different experience in Colorado and talking about the book and traveling and being awarded for it. So tell me how the rest of the country, in whatever arena, literary, beekeepers, or just people becoming educated about bees, were talking to you about it.
Well, I think the book, so I met John Miller in 2004 for the first time, and I was writing an article about a honey-based energy gel company that John's a partner in, and so I talked to all his partners, and ultimately, he was hard to reach. On the move, it was almond season, and he was busy with his bees. I finally talked to him, and I thought, and I didn't know that there were such things as migratory beekeepers. I had no idea how important honeybees are to modern agriculture. And I thought this was really interesting, and so that's what turned into the book. And at the time, John had suffered a really bad die-off of his bees, but it wasn't news at the time. Nobody seemed to care. So I started digging into the story, and by the time the book came out, colony collapse disorder had happened, which is, as I'm sure many of you know, this sort of mysterious bee die-off that happened starting in 2006 through 2009. And suddenly it was news. So I would say, I think one of the reasons the book was well received is because it was very timely, and people suddenly realized how important bees were and that they were not doing well. So I think on that level it appealed to not only readers of books and people who are interested in science and bees, but people who were just worried about the future of the earth. So it was sort of a hot environmental topic.
There is a TEDx talk, some of you may have seen it, that you did, I think, was it in Boulder? It was in
Boulder 2012.
So in that talk is some of the backstory that you had this picture out there of being an environmental writer and a grand hope to help, I guess, help the world, help our land and help the world we live in. And then you met up on the bee story and the journalism of trying to cover a story like this, and life happened to you along the way. I want you to fill in that story, and what struck me as interesting is through all of that, you kept wondering whether you were going to have a relevant voice in the discussion of bees in the country.
Yeah, so when so I first wrote this article about John. It came out in March of 2007. And colony collapse disorder first hit the news around February of that year. So my article was really timely, and I was immediately contacted by a couple of book publishers saying, "Do you want to write a book about this?" And I did. I felt it was a pretty long article, and I got to know John. I visited him here and also in his summer gigs in North Dakota. And I just felt like there was so much more to say about bees. There's so much more for me to learn. So I wanted to keep going. But what happened between, so the article came out in March 2007. In May 2007, I had my first child. And so I was not able to turn a book around really quickly. And while I was busy nurturing this little baby and trying, to string two sentences together, a couple of other books came out, and there was a lot more journalism, and everybody was very focused on what's killing the bees, what's killing the bees. And so the first couple of books that came out were really sort of gotcha environmental journalism. And I worked for quite a long time as an environmental journalist, and one of the reasons I was attracted to the field is because I live in the West. I spent a lot of time out in nature and in the wilderness, and it seemed like something that mattered, and I care about the earth, and it seemed like there was some way, it was a way I could contribute with my curiosity and my ability to write. And but because it took me so long to turn this book around, to get a proposal out, and everybody was rushing, when the colony collapse disorder first happened and the bees hit the news, everybody was certain that it was 100% pesticides, neonicotinoid pesticides that were killing the bees. A lot of people are still certain. I'm sure there are a lot of people in this audience who believe that that is what's killing the bees, and it probably certainly has a role in it. But by taking so long to write the book, this book didn't come out until 2011, I had a lot more time to stew over the subject, to talk to more people, to see what sort of studies were coming out. And I realized that it's just a lot more complicated than that. John has described it as what's happening to the bees is death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not just pesticides, it's poor nutrition, it's parasites, especially the dastardly varroa mite that I know that they talked about in the panel last week. So what I came to realize is that it's great to be the journalist, muckraker for forces of good, but if we banned all these pesticides and honeybees, they'd still be struggling and we wouldn't be paying any more attention to them. And so I think it's important to get the story right. I was lucky that it took me so long to write the book because I had more time to study it and try and decide what the story really was about.
What kept you committed? Because you could have either felt that the topic was passing you by or that you, a new mom, just were interested in new things now.
Definitely, I'm not cut out to be a full-time mom. That's one thing I realized pretty quickly. So I was committed to continuing to write. I had worked previously as a sort of deadline journalist, a lot of magazines, and that was pretty hard with young babies. But so it was actually a great time for me to turn to a longer form project. And the other thing is that I had so much fun learning about bees. I had so much fun learning about John, and he's, as many of you probably know, he's such a eloquent voice for honeybees and a compelling character, and his passion is so contagious that I think it caught me, and I wanted to see the project through to its conclusion.
If you were reading a magazine right now, this would be the question that's in the little box on the side of the page, okay? Because I'm in a detour. The way you focused on John in the Beekeeper's Lament is, to me, the way you focused on your great-great-grandmother, Julia, in the new book, American Ghost. And so tell me just a little bit about that thing that makes you want to deep dive or look up or whatever the direction is on this person and try to know all of it.
Well, I think John's a lot less mysterious than my dead great-great-grandmother, but there's, I think there's two things. There's passion, as I mentioned before, his passion for what he does, and it is contagious. And I think in my case with my great-great-grandmother, I have a real passion for the history of the American West and for digging into these historical mysteries, and especially writing about women who, from the last century who were forgotten and who they're so hard to find in documentary evidence. So I personally have a passion for sort of digging into this obscure 19th century history. And then I guess the other thing is, so I guess the other thing that I love shining a light on these dark corners of the world. And so a lot of people know about what's happening to bees now, and bees are sort of, they're hip. But when I started this project, they were not. And I thought, who knew that there are these guys, mostly guys, who generations on generations have been hauling bees around the country, hauling the balloon. And I just wanted to explore that world, and especially because it's a really Western focus, and I like writing about the West. And the same thing with my family. I had the opportunity to dig into this world that I didn't know much about, and I was pretty sure that most of my readers didn't, and just shine a light on this woman's life that otherwise would be forgotten.
I am guessing almost everybody in this room read the book, but let's revisit some of the description and your experience with John. And you can do this in both your perception and talking it and reading, if you'd like to, from your book.
Love to. So let me read a little something about John. Yes. So I often, when I do my readings, I describe him, but you can't see him right now. But most of you have seen what he looks like, so I won't bother you with that. I'll just start with what John is like. John Miller, smart and engaged, a master of details. He remembers everything, though not always as it actually happened. Like that. He's also very funny, even in the face of the many unfunny things that happen to a beekeeper these days. Bob Conan, a clean mirror and almond farmer, who's not terribly funny, but is very friendly and sturdy and thorough, once said to me that he didn't know how John Miller could have a sense of humor when so many things in his business are not humorous at all. Yet he does. The wit is mordant, the humor gallows. He jokes and yarns and speaks out and joins boards and cares for the future of his industry. But most of all, he cares about the loyal, industrious, sometimes violent, always fragile insects that die by the dozens every time he opens a hive. He doesn't mind making a fool of himself to make that point. I am the blabbermouth you've been seeking, he told me. He loves spreadsheets, loves them. If he were a mortician, he would log all the pallbearers into a database. He's serious about this because, remember, he feels strongly about death, but he also because he believes that numbers matter. He keeps detailed records for every bee yard, spreadsheets galore, and knows the exact bloom date for every type of plant his bees visit. He knows all his friends' phone numbers by heart. Though I do wonder now if that's still the case with cell phones. But he loves his friends. A few years ago, Miller bought Miller Grocery Store in his North Dakota summer hometown and turned the space into Miller Honey's False Hope Gym, stocking it with exercise equipment and leaving it open 24/7 for the locals to use. No fees required. He believes in lost causes. He's not patient. He often disappears without goodbyes. He rarely sits through a church service or a party or a beekeeping meeting or a book talk, without an abrupt and unexplained departure in return. And tonight we had dinner before and he was wheeling his wheelchair up and down the aisle of the restaurant. He can't sit still. He can be very, very peevish. He relishes saying things that make you cringe. He likes you to be complicit in his fun. Even unfun things can sound fun when he describes them.
So what was the play-by-play that I think the first place you visited was North Dakota?
No, I first came here. So every year John invites a few victims to his, your almond, what do you call your almond tour? His native migrant tour. Where he takes some unsuspecting journalist or bee lover during the almond bloom out to see what he does and to look at the wonder of 850,000 acres of almonds in bloom at once up and down the Central Valley. So after I met John on the phone for this article I was writing, I just, I wrote it, I have a little list of story ideas, and I put him on the top of the list and said, I gotta talk to that guy, I guess. So I called him up, and I think we talked for an hour and a half. As I mentioned, he likes to talk. And he told me story after story about being a fourth-generation beekeeper, about his great-grandfather who had was a pioneer of migratory beekeeping, bringing his bees from Utah to California for the summer so he could produce twice as much, or for the winter so he could produce twice as much honey. And so I just thought, this is a guy, I need to learn more about this. So I just booked a ticket. I didn't have an assignment from a magazine. I just said, I want to go. So I booked a ticket and went on the native migrant tour, and we visited a lot of blooming almonds and watched a lot of trucks go by. And I just learned a lot about honeybees and about agriculture in the Central Valley. And almonds in particular. And for those of you who don't know, almonds are sort of bread and butter of the beekeeping industry now. Beekeepers pretty much make most of their money. Honey prices are high right now, but when I visited, they made all their money in the 3 weeks or 6 weeks of almond pollination, and then spent the rest of the year losing it. So that was my first visit, and then I just wasn't done. So then John spent the summers in North Dakota making honey. And so I went up to Gapple, North Dakota, where his headquarters are, and I just had the best time. It's the coolest place. It was such a, I had never been to North Dakota. I'm from Colorado, so right where the mountains meet the plains. And I thought it was just going to be flat, like the Colorado plains. But it had been a very dry summer, but they just had a bunch of rain. So it was as green as green could possibly be, like it is here when it starts raining. And there was all the sloughs, and it was just so beautiful. And then I went from bee yard to bee yard and hung out with his non-native migrants, his South African workers, just experiencing real small town life in North Dakota just before the oil boom there. And so that was my next trip. then I started working on the book and then came out here a couple more times as well.
At the panel discussion, John said, my job is not to make honey. My job is to be the gateway of the food supply. And that's John Miller circa 2015. When you were working with him and when you got to know him, was the mindset at that point so much on the food supply and global food, or was he still really about the honey?
I think it had already turned at that point. It wasn't quite as extreme, but I mean, I think since the, John, help me out here. When
knew this was coming. We actually need to just give him a mic.
I know. I think we should be behind here. So we just I think since really the 80s, 90s, pollination has really become probably a larger part of honey, of big commercial beekeepers' profits than honey. Honey is sort of, it's great. They make a lot. There are beekeepers that only make honey and that don't do the pollination, but not many because it just the economies are.
But there's a reason I asked you and didn't ask him, because you were the observer, and as a journalist, you travel along and you write and you listen and watch, and you wrote what you saw and experienced. So I'm interested in where the discussion was about honey and bees then as an industry, as opposed to where it's come just in, 5, 6 years of time when all the rest of us have had sort of a tipping point of knowledge that we know that what we eat and the way we live is so dependent on the superorganism.
So I guess I would say that, in 2004, when I first met John, he was still, almonds were his bread and butter. They make him and they break him. And in that 2/3 of the nation's bees come into the almond orchards every winter and swap diseases. I think John someone compared it to a giant brothel. So all these bees come, bring their diseases, hang out together, and then go back and bring diseases to any bee that didn't come to California. And it was already bad. And in 2004, right when I met John, there was a huge die-off, but it didn't make the news because it wasn't quite as, they sort of knew more what was going on, or maybe people just weren't aware. So no, we weren't quite aware how important honeybees are to our food supply, but the bee guys were aware, and the almond guys were aware. So when I wrote that, the first article, I think there were 750,000 acres of almonds in the Central Valley. It's a lot. Now it's 850,000. It's more, and it's just gotten more of what it was, but it was still at that point. Pollination is what pays the bills, and honey is this sort of sweet pleasure that they do on the side now.
Well, let's talk about almonds, because this morning, not on air, you and I were talking about almonds being at the crossroad of this incredible economy for California, this incredible business for beekeepers, and now the subject of water and the huge amount of water that's required by almond farmers and the inability to fallow that land, that you have to protect the trees. So Hannah, you're here 4 years after the book, but it's the 4 years that we've been hit in the West by the drought. And I know it's hit in Colorado too, but you're coming back to the land and the fields that you saw then. I don't know, you take it from there.
So we have had our dry years in Colorado, but we're not in a drought like you are. And thank you.
Sorry, thanks for clarifying.
It's interesting to see how the mentality of people has shifted. And the obvious things is just not as green. It was pretty green when I came into Oakland. My brother lives in Berkeley and stayed there for a couple of nights. It's actually a little bit green. I was worried it was going to be brown, but as I came east, it got browner and browner.
It's the fog.
Yeah.
Getting coastal.
They had a rain recently too. So it's not as bucolic and fertile looking as last time I was here. I was telling you earlier, my brother and his wife, they eat all sorts of crazy smoothie concoctions. Her brother's here. He can probably attest. So I asked them what they made their lunchtime smoothie with, and they said they're eating fewer almonds. They didn't put any almonds in it because that way they could take a longer shower. These are the kind of intellectual gymnastics they do.
Typical dinner time conversation.
Yeah. So that you didn't hear. I mean, it just seems like this is in the last couple of months where it's been a big story about how much water almonds use. And like there was a story in NPR this morning, and I got the sense from that story that it's not necessarily that they use more water than other crops as much as there's so many of them, and you can't let them fallow the way you can during drought.
Well, we're now in our 4th year, so the fear is increasing, and it's so warm and it's so dry. Do you keep up on bee science, bee blogs, bee news?
I try. Yes, I try. So I think, because I'm always waiting for that, the day it comes, it's solved, colony collapse disorder, everything I said was wrong. Which is a good reason to hedge and say it's complicated.
You're laughing, but you don't really think that will happen, do you?
I don't know. I think well, there's a couple, the more I talk to people, and I just try to keep up, I call bee scientists from time to time, like check in on John every, a couple times a year. How are your bees doing? What's happened lately? Anything new and exciting or horrifying that's happened? And
Yeah,
the science,
That was his horrifying.
Bart Ryan had to tell me about that one. But it's the same. It's still sort of what colony collapse disorder. What's clear is that it's sort of over to a degree. I mean, the bees are still suffering, but there haven't been a lot of cases or any cases, I think, of colony collapse disorder in the last 3 or 4 years. And I went to South by Southwest Eco in Texas in October with Tim and Hillsdorf, who's one of the scientists who discovered colony collapse disorder. And he feels like it was some sort of event, like something happened that sort of swept through the bees the way all these other pests and pathogens have done so. And that it subsided. Maybe there was some resistance that developed, but that whatever happened, it's been compounded by this much more complex picture of disappearing pasture and the varroa mite, which really, weakens hives and vectors so many different diseases.
I was explaining to you that at Capitol Public Radio, we built a garden in the back, and we might be the only public radio station that has a garden. But we put 4 hives in the back, and in fact, they have bees in them from Randy Alper's farm. He's been kind enough to work with our staff. But these are really interesting hives. They're built on a scale, which isn't novel, but within them is a microphone and 2 climate sensors for humidity and temperature. And they're set up to be monitored on your smartphone or on a computer app. So these monitored hives are at 40 locations all over the world, and it's part of the new science that I think really has emerged in the last 4 to 5 years. And to know that there's something, Hannah, that could burst through, that could be a window into the hive, literally and figuratively, that could unlock some of the science, must still intrigue you. Do you ever think about writing again? Do you ever think about when we leapfrog to some of those answers that you have to revisit this?
Yes and no. First of all, I think John Miller needs to get one of those hives. He likes to innovate. That is something new. There was no discussion of that when I wrote the book. So that's really cool. And I do I don't think I'll ever write or hopefully work on bees again because I like to move around. I'm too restless in terms of my writing. But I follow it, and I'm so engaged with the debate, and I'm still trying to do magazine stuff. So when I went to Texas to South by Southwest, one of the other people on the panel that I was on was Jerry Hayes, who's a beekeeper. He was the chief apiarist for Florida. Now he's gone to work for Monsanto, and right? So I want to write about that because Monsanto is trying to develop RNAi technology. It's called that, where it's something they feed to bees that the varroa mite would then absorb through the hemolymph, and it would disable the varroa mites. And so it's a new approach to trying to deal with this horrible parasite that is really just decimating beekeeping. And so that I'm going to try to write about that. I mean, I'm still engaged in the subject and sort of it's at learning these new newsworthy things. But I can't imagine, I mean, maybe there's another book there, but I think that I'd be saying the same thing over again. I would bore myself.
So it's not just because you were stung, right?
I'm going to read to you guys about getting stung because I don't like getting stung by bees. That is one thing I've learned while researching this book. I'd never been stung before. I've been stung by a yellow jacket, and I thought bees are so much cuter that they wouldn't hurt as much. So I will tell you about the experience now. The ancient Roman writer Columella cautioned that bee-going folk must avoid such things as offend bees, like being unchaste or uncleanly, for impurity and sluttiness they utterly abhor, along with smelling of sweat or having a stinking breath caused either through eating of leeks, onion, garlic, and the like, or being given to surfeiting or drunkenness. In a word, thou must be chaste, cleanly, sweet, sober, quiet, and familiar, so they will love thee and know thee from all others, he wrote. Maybe I wasn't. Bees tend to go for dark spots, for eyes and ears and nostrils. This one aimed for my eye, and she stung me unprovoked on the brow, and it hurt. In 1984, an Arizona entomologist named Justin Schmidt invented a sting pain index that rates the relative pain caused by various insect stings, ranging from 0 to 4 for those that cause absolutely debilitating pain. Schmidt is the author of the holiest text of the insect sting field, Insect Defenses, a 482-page tome. That's my next book. But he's better known for his simple index, which dissects in the evocative language you might associate more with the wide-besotted sommelier than an entomologist, the sensation of getting stung. The honeybee ranks just a notch above dead center of Schmidt's index, which goes like this. 1.0, sweat bee. Light, ephemeral, almost fruity. A tiny spark has singed a single hair on your arm. 1.8, bullhorn acacia ant. A rare, piercing, elevated sort of pain. Someone has fired a staple into your cheek. 2.x, I'm not sure why he does X. There was honeybee and European hornet, like a match head that flips off and burns on your skin, which I think it hurts a lot more than that. 3.0, red harvester ant, bold and unrelenting. Someone is using a drill to excavate your ingrown toenail. 3.0, paper wasp, caustic and burning, like spilling a beaker of hydrochloric acid on paper cut. And the most painful sting apparently is 4.0 plus, the bullet ant, like firewalking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch rusty nail in your heel. If John Miller had the time to create his own index, it would be specific to the honeybee, a cowboy words index that rates the number of curse words you're likely to say. I think someone has, since this book came out, has done that. I read about it, although it's not cowboy words. They stung themselves in different places. So John's gotten this far in his own formulation. If you're stung by the eyes, you use lots of cowboy words. If you're stung on the index finger, you might not use any. Schmidt also has opinions about which body parts hurt most. The under eye, he notes, is going to floor you, as is anywhere on the cartilaginous part of the nose. The upper lip, too, will engender immense amounts of undue grief. The scalp, Schmidt says, weird. It makes a hard little knot, which is very annoying for a while because the tissue up there can't expand. Miller swears that if you get stung on the scalp, you'll feel a phantom pain on the bottom of your foot. I had an opportunity to test that hypothesis. Bees are angry when their hives are being divided. After I watched Miller's employees split some hives, I drove a couple hundred yards uphill to his office and took off my veil. But when I got out of the car, a bee flew straight into my hair, struggled for a few seconds, and dug into my scalp. Hey! I pulled on my veil, but another bee was inside it. That one got caught in my hair as well. And that was it. I threw my veil and gloves and notebook and pen and digital voice recorder to the ground and began flapping my arms and running in circles. I told John to act this out, so this is a lot more dramatic though. This is apparently normal. We have these innate reactions that are almost impossible to overcome, says Schmidt. Ineffective flapping and running in circles is, of course, not what you're supposed to do. It only attracts more bees. Better to run in a straight line away from the offending insects. Most people like to flap and scream and duck and run, but that doesn't get the bee out of your hair, he says. The absolutely dumbest thing you can do is jump in a body of water, because the bees just wait for you to emerge and then sting your nose and mouth, which makes it harder to hold your breath underwater. The smartest thing is to get inside away from the bees. That's not what I did. I kept running in circles until one of Miller's employees led me inside to the office and removed the bees from my hair, along with a stinger and a 3-inch long string of bee intestine that was attached to my scalp. That was fun.
And you still kept going, and you kept going because the honey of it all was out there. And you write a lot about everybody else's passion, and that was part of the panel discussion, but you become eloquent about honey yourself and about that magical elixir that just kept you going.
Yeah, I love honey. I have a sweet tooth in general. And at some point while researching this book, I switched from, I never have sugar anymore. I only have honey in my coffee, honey in my tea. It's the only sweetener I use anymore. And I was, John, being the guy that he is, has quite a remarkable honey collection. So he sent me, I think after the first time I visited, he sent me like 6 different jars of honey, and I hid them away so nobody, my kids and my husband could get them. But I actually have a section as well about different kinds of honey, because people, it really is an acquired passionate taste. So those in the bee business talk about different honey varietals, the way uniphiles discuss why. Eyes closed, tongue on the roof of the mouth, appraising notes and nose. Orange blossom honey, according to Miller, leaves a floral taste on your back molar, a citrusy finish that goes well with food and is never too pushy. The bees, however, get cranky during the orange bloom because the nectar flows like a fire hose and then bang, shuts off. Buckwheat honey, favored for some inexplicable reason by Orthodox Jews and Muslims in New York and the Middle East, has a cloying farm smell, a big sheepy nose, according to Miller. One of Miller's employees likened the aroma to that of mouse meat, and I tend to agree. It's good in coffee, too strong on toast. Clover honey is another favorite, light, delicate, pure, the color of late afternoon air. Some consider creamy clover honey harvested from the irrigated valleys of Idaho and Wyoming to be the beluga caviar of honey, the ace in the pocket smart beekeeper holds to make sure his relationships stay civil. There are nearly as many honeys as there are blossoms, though not all are coveted by humans or even by bees. For all the economic value attached to almond pollination, the honey produced from almond blossoms is bitter and unpleasant tasting to humans and bees alike. Almonds bloom at the same time as apricots in California, and bees much prefer apricots. Almond farmers are well advised to keep their plantings far from any neighboring apricots, lest the bees forsake their cash crop for a sweeter flower. Onion honey is bitter, dark, and nasty. Bees detest pollinating the plants, and a beekeeper must leave 10 colonies in every acre of onions to ensure that the bees visit the flowers in sufficient numbers. The hives stink for weeks afterwards. Sunflower honey has an unpleasant aftertaste. The canola bloom gives bees a bad temper. No one knows why. The honey has a tenderly aromatic flavor but granulates in about 12 hours. The best honey plants aren't always the best plants for other human purposes. Miller's favorite honey of all time comes from the yellow star thistle plant. The star thistle is a terrible, noxious, invasive, nasty weed, he says, which proliferates along roadsides and is toxic to horses. It is so hated by farmers that in California, state agriculture officials have released a wasp that lays eggs that kill the bloom. So star thistle honey guys just don't get the production that they used to. Botanists suspect that the weed hitchhiked to the New World with alfalfa seeds from Spain, and they can now be found all over the West. The stuff Miller likes comes from a specific microclimate in Northern California, right along Interstate 5. It is really good, I can attest. Its honeys taste the way flowers smell, like violets, like honeysuckle, like Miller says, a wall of sunshine. In the South, they swear by orange and tupelo honey. In Alaska and Washington State, they covet northwestern fireweed, gathered from the magenta blossoms of lamp-shaped plants that flourish in open clearings of the Cascades, the Olympics, and the Coast Ranges in the wake of forest fires. It is mild and clear, and the light dances through the jar.
few more minutes, and I'd like to hear some questions that you have. And I believe we'll have a mic come out to the audience, but if you have a question you'd like to ask Hannah, we'll get that underway. Meanwhile, I do want to ask if you came away convinced of one reason more than another from the whole spectrum of science and scientists that you spoke to about what was happening to the bees.
Well, again, it's complicated. I think it's generally modern culture is what's happened to the bees. So, the monocrops and lots of pasture. The bees are under tremendous stress being moved from crop to crop. But if I had to say, one horrible thing that's happened to honeybees, it's the varroa mite. That's like the.
Do you put the varroa mite above what's happened in agriculture?
It's part and parcel. That's the thing. You can't appeal one thing because the varroa mite has spread because honeybees move all over the country. So they're very mobility, and what allows beekeepers to stay in business is moving from crop to crop is what spreads all these pathogens. And but yes, I think the varroa mite has made life for beekeepers incalculably harder.
It's a ridiculous question, really, to ask of anybody, but we so much want the answer.
I think I may be wrong, probably am, but if you solve the varroa mite problem, life would be much easier for beekeepers. They still have problems because there's lots of things that affect bees and just the way the modern agricultural economy works, but without the varroa mite, they would be much happier people.
At least in scientific elimination, there would be one factor out of there, allowing everyone to focus on whatever else the puzzle might be.
Planting more flowers.
Here we go. Do we have a question? Does somebody have a mic in the audience?
Come on down.
I just want to know, aside from what you learned in the field, how much research was involved in this? What were your favorite sources?
My favorite source? John Miller. He knows everything about bees. If he doesn't, he'll tell you something anyway. And so, my first place I ever, and he also, like, great communicator, very eloquent, loves to email. Now he likes to text. So I prefer emailing with him. But, so that would be my first, if I had a question, that's the first place I went. In terms of, books I read, Lorenzo Lamp's Construct book which is, he invented the rectangular hive that we know with the movable frames. And he was such a wonderful writer, and he's such a wonderful historical figure. So his book was a huge sort of touchstone for me while researching it. And Virgil wrote about bees. So there's so much history of going back, wonderful writing about bees. So in terms of sort of literary inspiration, that's certainly where I went. I interviewed a lot of scientists as well. So I did unlike my new book, which is all dead people, there's a lot of people alive who I talked to as a journalist rather than a historian. So there was a lot of interviews. And then I read every book I could get my hands on. Although there's a lot of e-books, so I had to be sort of selective. I could still be reading the books and have it not remembered.
I think that was an important choice you had to keep making along the way, is how far down the rabbit hole to go on different paths, how far into Europe or into Africa to reach on bee history and where bees were migrating from when they came to the United States and how.
Yeah, and I just tried to, in terms of telling a story and trying to hopefully not bore people so much that they put the book down, I just tried to keep to John's story. And so, so part of having him be such a good source was to try to, always bring the story back to him, which is, as a writer, it is easy just to chase tangents, and I'm very guilty of doing so. But, I'd always try to follow back to John's story and the larger story of modern beekeeping and the struggles that beekeepers are having.
Which, by the way, I'll say in this new book, in the fact that your great-great-grandmother is not alive, it was fun to hear your voice in your writing say, well, I suppose that if I asked her this, or do I think that if she could tell me this, she would. And you had to step a little bit out of all the facts and statistics and just fill in some of the flesh around the skeleton, I guess.
Yeah, and that was hard for me because, and I had to do that. You know, I'm in this book. Obviously, it was written about me wandering around flapping my arms, and getting stung. But I'm a lot less in this book than I am in the new one, and that was a real struggle for me. I don't love writing about myself. And with each draft, and the B book was a lot easier to write than it's easier to write. I mean, it's hard because of science, because I didn't know a lot of science. So the research was tough in the initial draft, but then I showed it to people. They said, "That's great. Just change a few things." And with the new book, it was much like the writing. I turned it into people, and they're like, "Oh no, this is terrible. This is not good." And everybody wanted more of me. This is, it ended up being much more of a memoir than I intended it to be. Because I had these dead people and these sort of dry historical facts, and to flesh them out to add some sort of feeling and narrative to the story, I had to be in there a lot more.
Is there another question?
Yeah, Susan.
Hannah, I have two questions. Where did you learn your skills, and what advice do you have for beginning writers?
Well, in some ways the answer is the same for both. Read. I read a lot. I was never trained as a journalist except for by working as a journalist. I think probably sort of stupidly decided that I was more interested, that I would be better off getting a body of knowledge, and then all the sort of craft and marketing and how to get people to hire me to write things would just come somehow. So I studied history instead. And it didn't work out too well. So I know a lot about history, and I feel like I sort of come full circle with the Ghost book, because that is really a history book. So I didn't have like the training of how to tell a story. Some of that you just feel your way through. Read a lot. I read a lot more now about craft than I did when I got started, and just sort of how to tell a story. So, and my advice for someone getting started is read, right? And the part that going to journalism school would help a lot with is networking. It's just meet other people and ask them to, take their classes and ask them to read your stuff. Just keep trying, keep reaching out to people.
Are you already forming an idea for a next book?
Maybe. I actually started writing a novel about the Spanish Inquisition, and I've written like 3,000 words. It's like very beginning, and I know I've never written a novel before. I've barely written any fiction. I haven't written any fiction since I was in my early 20s.
So somebody just said, wait a minute, she said 3,000 words was really a beginning. Wow.
Yeah. Well, a book is 80,000 words.
No, but 3,000 words for someone could feel like a novel. It feels like
like magnum opus right now.
Yeah, I hate to even ask that question because this book is just out, the new book. You are just on tour. People are just reading it. In fact, you're probably more of an audience than anyone has had in person with you about the new book.
Yes, yeah, to a degree. So the book is about my great-great-grandmother, as you mentioned, and she's supposed to haunt a family home, which is a hotel in Santa Fe. So the hotel did have a party, and there were a lot of people there. So that was a big audience, but they were like drinking champagne and stuff. So it seemed like I wish you guys had champagne. Yeah, so one thing between these two books, I did try to write a dog memoir. So I sent it to my agent. He's like, oh, it's not gonna work. He said it either has to be, I thought it was gonna be humorous about my father who hated pets. And I wrote probably like 40 pages, 50 pages, and I showed it to my agent. He said, well, it either has to like go dig deeper into your sort of troubled childhood, which I didn't really feel like I had, or it needs to be funny. And I thought it was funny. So he said, I don't want to go deeper, and I guess it's not funny. So I sort of think of that as a palate cleanser for the next book. And then literally like the next day I thought about the Spanish Inquisition. Well, maybe the dog memoirs before the ghost book. So then, I suddenly realized, wait, I have this book I've always wanted to write. This is my time to write it. So the Spanish Inquisition may be a palate cleanser.
so to speak. We heard a long list of very interesting titles that Bart read, so I think your sense of humor and curiosity.
I like all weird.
There's another question.
I was interested in the topic of snorkeling salmon encounters, and so I wonder, how do you find your topics?
You know, I'm not very good at finding topics, actually. I keep, you know, there was a wonderful article in the New York Times Magazine last year about crazy raspberry ants, which are these ants which are like bumming up, like all sorts of like electrical machinery and stuff. There's this new invasive ant, and I wrote about them.
You wrote already about them.
And then I was like, why didn't I think about writing an entire article about that? So I sometimes these great ideas just like blow by me. In the case of the snorkeling salmon encounters, when I lived in Boulder before I met my husband, my roommate was dating a guy who was a snorkeling salmon encounter, and but it took me like 6 months to really say, hey, that would be a good story. And so, it was particularly about, they were doing salmon counts on the sort of upper reaches of the Salmon River in Idaho, and there's all these 4 dams further down. So it was about the campaign to take those dams down to restore salmon fisheries. So, but you know, it's a lot of times the litigious prostitutes. I can't really remember. I'm trying to remember how that story came about.
Oh, I can only imagine.
You know, something in Butte, Montana, it was a lawsuit. It was a prostitution museum, and a prostitute had moved from LA to run it with the old Butte guy who was in historical buildings, and they got in a fight pursuing each other. And I mean, there might have been just a little snippet in the newspaper, just a little thing, and you think
And you said, that's a story?
yeah, that's a story. And sometimes, you know, but that one, you know, smacked me in the face. But sometimes, yeah, you just quite never. A lot of times I'll live with the story for 9 months and say, wait a second, would be a great thing to write about. And I just tend to like to write about obscure, weird things that just strange twists in the world.
How did life change, though, after putting this book out? It's so well received. It's a bestseller. It's an award winner. It puts you in a niche of being smart and scientific about bees. And with that comes an expectation, and you're on a much different stage. How did life change?
Well, I think I've pretty much blown that niche apart by writing a book about a ghost. So, you know, I think, you know, partly because I have small kids, and so you know, I could have gone out there and been the bee expert, but there are so many people who know so much more about bees than I do, and so I do science and environmental writing, but I also do write about weird things in the American West. So I sort of, you know, it was in part a conscious decision that I did not want to write a really similar book to this, because I didn't want to get too firmly encased in a niche. But yeah, now nobody's going to take me seriously.
Can I ask your children's names?
Delia and Milo.
Do you happen to know that there is a video on the internet of your daughter, Delia, incredibly enjoying the very end of the ice cream in an ice cream box? Do you know what video I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
And honestly, if you went home tonight and you Googled Delia Nordhaus, or if you
Just Delia finishes her ice cream.
You know what? I think I was Googling you,
Yeah.
looking around, and it came up, and here's this little girl in a high chair, absolutely precious, squealing as if she was a child actor and delighting in this little carton of ice cream.
Lightning carton.
She flipped it around. I thought, isn't that an example of the world that we live in now? Because you are who you are, so your daughter loving ice cream is pretty magical.
Yes. Not sweet with honey, I'm sure. Change that.
Is there one last question? Oh, well, maybe we do.
Will you read from the new book? If we have time, sure. Why don't we do the questions first?
We'll do it.
First of all, thank you so much for coming to our community. It's a real pleasure for us. I mean, over the course of the 4 weeks of this year's BOC events, I'm sure there have been, just guessing, 600 people that have been brought together because of this, so thank you. would like to ask you a question about John Miller and how, as you got enamored or captured or stung, however you want to put it, when you met him, just as a hypothetical, what if in meeting him he was more of a straight scientist type, showing you the hives? Do you think the book would still have built for you and then emerged into this, acclaimed story?
No, I don't think I would have written the book, honestly. Because I'm interested in bees, obviously. I've spent quite a number of years of my life researching and writing about them. But I am more interested in stories. And without a storyteller at the center of it, I didn't want to just write a straight science book about bees. There's plenty of those. And I sort of wanted to write a book that you would want to read regardless of what it was about. And for that you need, and I didn't have, what the book didn't have was like a real narrative arc, boy meets bees, boy loses bees, boy gets bees back, to some degree. But what it had was character, and without John and without his eloquent, I was really worried about writing another book without plagiarizing John, because he was so quotable, and even when I wasn't quoting him, so much of his language and his view of the world seeped into the writing that I just don't think I wouldn't. There's no way I would have written that book without him alive in it.
He knows.
You know that, John? Oh, he's taking me all over the other side. I think I'm feeling back and forth.
He left Jan, his wife, here. Over here.
Actually, I did a book signing in Boulder, where I live in Colorado, and my kids were there, and they were, I guess, I also did a Q&A, and I guess the kids were running back and forth across the stage the entire time. So
It's everybody's favorite video. Parents have no idea. There was another question over here.
Back to the honey side of the bees, there's been a resurgence in winemaking using honey to mead. I wonder if you've had a chance to try any of the mead wines and what you think of that as a use of honey.
well, I think it's fantastic. I love mead, especially not the there's some really good meads out there now. I actually, I did a talk in 2011 when this book came out in Utah, of all places, and they had a mead tasting at the bookstore, which I'm sure was totally illegal. But there were a lot of really good meads, and I think the first ones, it's gotten a lot more sophisticated too. So at first they were sort of cloying and overly sweet, but now there's some great ones that you wouldn't even know. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it tasting like honey, but they really sort of really different tasting, and they taste like sort of another type of wine. They're really good ones.
What would you prefer? Another question, or to read a couple? Read something.
Let's read. Okay. Let's read. Yeah. Okay, this was I'll read just a couple of short little paragraphs. This is one describing, so this is, Julia Staub was my great-great-grandmother, and this is sort of the beginning. I write in the book about how I came to write about her, and particularly I found this old family book that told more about her family, and just found myself wanting to learn more. So this section here is just the first to write. The first time I really didn't talk about her as a real historical figure, when I dig into her past. So Julia wore black at her wedding. German brides did that. She married on Christmas Day, and a day or two later, she left her home forever. In a photo of Julia from around the time she married, she wears a black satin dress with a subtle floral pattern on the arms. Lace cascades down her chest, and a large ruche holds the bow around her neck. Perhaps this is a bridal photo. She is young, barely a woman, and she sits uncomfortably and looks away from the camera. Her expression is somber, the way people were in early photographs. Her nose is aquiline and a bit severe, her eyebrows barely there. A dark coil of thick, twisted hairs piled high on her head, a frothy fringe of curls circling her forehead. So that's what Julia looked like. And I'll just read one other see if I have it here. Just a quick explanation of why I wrote the book. Another paragraph. I can find it. So after I found the book, I had written about Julia when I was in my 20s. It was the first article I ever published as a journalist. And at the time, I sort of wrote about her I was, in my early 20s, I wrote about her as a young bride who I was certainly been victimized by men the way I felt at the time. So this sort of explains why I ended up writing the book. And then, so after I had my daughter, I found my Aunt Lizzie's book, This Family History, and that led me on this journey. When I was a younger woman, I imagined Julia to be young as well, struggling as a new bride, frustrated and angry, beset by men. Now that I was older, Julia seemed to be aging alongside me. So many women's stories trail off in the books and the movies with a happy ending of finding a mate. But I was married now, and I understood that the wedding was only the beginning. I had children of my own, and I knew the terror of having so much to lose. I knew, too, the daily sturm and drag of raising children. Motherhood rarely allows for solitude, yet it begets its own kind of isolation. From one's past, from one's youth, from the women we once thought we were and would become. I had gone from heroine to auxiliary, from Fräulein to Frau. I wondered if this was how Julia had felt. She had lived in a time before granite-countered subdivisions colonized the empty land. But no matter the era, certain inevitabilities remain the same. We move unremittingly through life from youth to death. I understood this now. Julia was first an ancestor for me, sepia-toned and indifferent, then a roaming spirit, titillating and abstract. Now I realized she was also a woman, a specific, particular woman who courted and married and emigrated and raised children in a rough and unfamiliar world, and then began to grow old far from her family. Her life was real, and it had traversed the same hurdles and milestones from girlhood to marriage to motherhood to middle age that I was now passing in my own journey. And as I read in Lizzie's book, it's my great-aunt's book, about her troubled family, I wanted suddenly to understand Julia's journey too. How had Julia come to New Mexico? How had she found life there? Had she loved her husband? Had he loved her? Was he a tyrant? Was she ill, depressed, insane? Did she kill herself? Was she murdered? Leave you with a cliffhanger.
I don't know how many of you prefer the book that you can touch, or whether some of you are audiobooks people or other Kindle, Nook, whatever. But because I was layering books by Hannah Nordhaus, I had the CD version, which Hannah didn't have time to read herself. And so you hired a narrator, X.C. Sands, with a very interesting voice that I imagined actually could be Hannah's. But you told me that you haven't ever heard this. You haven't ever heard the audio version. Have you even gone back and read either of your books?
Nope. I haven't. So I'm surprised I actually can remember anything about the book. No, I actually recently read some passages from the book. This was not bad. But, I think the ghost book is, and at some point, I think I don't want to go back and say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I feel like, and I think the ghost book's way too fresh. I think if I read it now, I'd go, why did I do that? I know it's a stupid thing to say. So I tend not to, I obviously read sections of it and go back, but
Well, I wanted to add something to your library at home because I happened to hear this really good book called American Ghost on a CD. And just for that one day, someday, when you want to pop the CD in, will you take this?
Oh, thank you.
Your kids.
My kids will listen to it, but yeah.
It's really exciting for me to give you your own book.
Thank you.
Electronic version.
I know you're ready to wrap it up, but I would, there are a number of high school students in the back in the very cheap seats back there. And I wonder if you would just, if both of you or one of you, have any advice for them as they sort of finish their years at Placer High and get ready to move out into the world.
Well, I will say to you what I always say, and Hannah is absolutely a perfect example of this. It is that don't get so hung up on picking the right thing or exactly the thing that needs to be the rest of your life. But be committed to learning more, stay curious, and go study something that you like, that intrigues you, that pulls you in. Because it's a stepping stone, and one thing leads you to another. You just don't want to stagnate in your life. So go venture out, be as curious as Hannah has been, and find something that you love, like a honeybee or a person like John Miller who tells you the story, and keep going, because almost everybody will fall by the wayside. The tenacious people, the ones that stay determined, will keep going, and there is a pot of honey for those of you.
Oh, now it's my turn. What she said? Don't let other people do your work for you.
That's really important.
Yeah, but she just did it for me. But I would say, I mean, I think the one thing that being a writer is hard. When you don't get a lot of positive feedback. There's a lot of rejection, and a thick skin. I mean, I'm still working on thickening my skin, but having a thick skin, I think, in anything you try is so important. And as Beth said, just to keep going and keep trying. Or maybe it's not where you end up in the long run, but if you keep moving forward, you're going to find something that grabs you.
And if you ever get discouraged, there's a book called The Beekeeper's Lament. And it really shows you about getting pounded down year in, year out at different times when you least expect it, and you just keep getting back up again.
Thank you so much for.
That we probably should have John wheel out here with us. And I want to thank Hannah again for being so curious and bringing all of us together and all of the community.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Okay, everybody, tweet it out. Tell everyone about Auburn. Thank you very much.
We have a couple of gifts for our 3 people on stage right now that you want to stick around. Plus, Hannah will hang around as long as it takes to get your book signed. But first, Kendra this is the famous Kendra who is the wizard behind the curtain. We have gifts for Beth, Hannah, and John Miller to commemorate their experience with us in One Book, One Community. Thank you all very much for coming out and making our program a success. It's so appreciated.